Hello guys, welcome to lesson number 44 in our drawing series, Drawing Tutorials for Beginners. Towards the end of the last lesson, what we started to do in our homestead picture was we started adding some of this foreground grass, this light grass, using our kneaded eraser and also our mono zero eraser. And what we're going to be doing today, I did post up on the group a couple of days ago, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding some clouds. Now I found a reference image over on Pixabay that's over on the group. If you go into the section at the top which says albums and then there's reference images as well, you'll just find a image that I found, and it's of a very similar looking barn. It could almost be the same barn from a slightly different angle, but it's got some very ominous clouds in the background, and I just wanted to show you a technique that I use for drawing clouds. So for this we're going to be using a 2B and a 4B pencil, and we're also going to be using our kneaded eraser. If you make one end of your kneaded eraser into a slight point and then the other end just the round area that we can tap. And then I'm also going to be using some very, very soft tissue paper. I know I don't ever use anything for blending, but this is the one and only occasion where I do actually tend to use something. When we are drawing clouds, I want that very, very ethereal kind of soft look to it. And I just don't feel that you can quite get that just using the pencils themselves. So if you have a look at your reference image, I've got my reference image up in front of me actually on my iPad, which is probably why you're not going to be able to see it. And I've not printed it out because we're not going to be trying to do an exact copy of it, but what we are trying to do is just get some of the general shapes, and I'll talk you through some of the ideas. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to be looking for some of the general shapes with clouds, and I'm just using my tapered stroke. I'm being a little bit more liberal actually, and just moving the pencil around in some sort of random patterns. But what we are doing, which is very, very similar to every type of drawing that we've done so far, is working in the dark areas first. And it's this initial layer of graphite that we're going to be really working with. So I'm just looking for these general shapes. And just going in those darkest zones. I'm using my 2B pencil at the moment. We will use some of the 4B a little bit later on. So I'm just looking for the general form. Now, one thing that I've noticed with clouds, I haven't noticed any other object that displays the same characteristics that I'm about to explain to you, but generally speaking, in everything we see in nature, the lighter something is, the closer that it is to us, or the light source. When we actually look at clouds, you can have lighter clouds which are behind darker clouds. So essentially the lighter clouds can sometimes be behind a darker cloud, which ordinarily, if we were drawing a face, let's say, the tip of the nose would always be the lightest area because it's actually what's protruding the furthest out and it's catching more light. So the creases around the edge of the nose, for example, will be darker. But this doesn't apply when we're drawing clouds. I guess it's because of the angle that the sunlight's hitting them and the density of the clouds, how many water molecules, etc. in there. Okay, so I've got a little bit of my dark value in there. So I'm going to take my tip of my paper or my tissue paper, and I'm just going to very, very lightly just start to blend out slightly, and I'm just using some circular motions. Now be very careful you don't press too hard with this paper because it can, or the tissue paper, it can tear. And it can also make a bit of a mess of your paper. And again, it's something that I don't love to do, but certainly for clouds, it is really the one occasion when I do allow myself a little bit of blending. So I can see that on this reference image here, we've got some darker areas and darker patches, again, within the shape. And this is what's going to give our cloud some volume. Now, the reference image that I have selected for us You just convert that to a black and white image. I know it's a colour image, but the clouds are actually black and white in there. It's one of those fantastic pieces of photography that's obviously been edited in some way, but we've got some colour, and then we've also got some black and white in there. But if you convert that just to a black and white image, you can easily do that on your phone. If you're using a phone or an iPad, you just have to go into the photograph itself, and there's an option to edit, and you can just turn it into a black and white image or mess around with the tones a little bit. So again, I'm just getting these light edges. I'm turning my pencil regularly, and the thing with these clouds is you can be very, very free-flowing and making sure that your hand's constantly moving. We can do these very loose types of scribbles in places. Again, I'm not bearing down too hard. I'm just going to come in again with my soft tissue paper. So now what we're going to do is I'm just going to take my kneaded eraser and I'm just going to play around within the dark areas and just bring out some of these wonderful little highlighted areas. And you can see straight away now that we are starting to create some volume in there. We've got some light areas meeting the darker areas now, and we are starting to develop the contrast within the cloud area itself. And I'm just paying rough focus on my reference image. I'm not being too pedantic with it. The thing with clouds is take a photograph of a series of clouds and then 2.5 seconds later it's changed. It's a little bit like hair, so it does give us the opportunity to be, or give us a little bit of an artistic license to it. So I'm going to come in again with my 2B pencil, and I'm just going to again just darken up some of those darker areas. We've got some wispy areas where there's more sunlight or daylight breaking through some of those clouds. And this 2B pencil is perfect because we've got enough graphite there for us to move it around. Now you can use your brush again. You want to get some extra graphite in certain areas, you can use your brush. But to get that very soft look, that vapor type look, I would recommend some very soft tissue paper, or you can even use some cotton wool balls, not the Q-tips. The thing with the Q-tips is it does start to grind down into the tooth of the paper an awful lot. And because the kneaded eraser is so important with these clouds, we need to be able to remove the value. So I really wouldn't suggest a Q-tip, and definitely not a blending stump. You are not going to be able to get this same look and these different values if we're using the blending stump, or the tortillon it's called in some shops and art supply stores. And the trick is get a little bit of value down. Don't be over blending and over smoothing it. You can almost draw as much of the clouds in the darker areas before you even ever smudge it out and smooth it out. And I really would suggest doing that. Obviously I'm going to be probably using the tissue paper a little bit more than I ordinarily would do, because I'm trying to show you the technique and the methodology that I'm using. If this is your first time that you visited the channel, thanks so much for watching. We're obviously well into the 40s now, 44 we're on in terms of the lessons, and I really would suggest going and checking out some of the previous lessons. Lessons 1 to 6 take you through some of the essential pencil skills that we need to be able to draw realistic portraits, landscapes, pictures of pets, etc. So I'm just going to take the tissue paper again, and just in these very, very soft circular motions. And then I'm just going to, again, I'm going to repeat the process. So I'm looking for some of those very highlighted areas and just dabbing and small drags of the kneaded eraser. I've got it into a nice point. Just to bring out, like we say, the volume of these clouds. We're going for quite a dramatic look overhead. And what this is also going to do is it's going to give us a nice contrast for this light side of the building. Going to give us a nice background there, and obviously the lighter grass in the foreground is going to be a nice contrast. So we're going to have dark around the top in the sky, some dark clouds in there, followed by the building which has a couple of contrasting areas in. So we've got the very dark side to the left, followed by the very light side. So we're imagining that the sun is breaking through the clouds somewhere off in the distance to the right. And then we've got that contrasting light area at the front in the foreground with the very white grass, sort of meadow that this homestead is sitting on. Don't forget to check out the Instagram page as well. So that's at artisticn1k. And if you do follow me, and just let me know that you've come through the YouTube channel or the Facebook group, I'll follow you back and help as much as we can one another just to get our fantastic art out there. Now what you notice, even when you blend on an area that we've already taken some highlights out, there's an area in here, they still remain lighter than the areas surrounding it, and because we have taken the value out of that. And that's what we're talking about. We've got a range of values, and we, even in something as wispy and floaty as clouds, we have got volume to them, and we have got depth and dimension. So we're just going to keep repeating this process until we feel that one of our areas is sort of matching up to what we've got over on our reference image. But again, I've only really put the reference image there just to give us some rough direction. I don't like drawing anything that we want realism out of our mind, because we always tend to make things too manufactured looking and too many repeated areas and repeated patterns when we are doing it from memory. I certainly find that with myself. So if I was ever trying to draw grass or hair, even if it was something that I was not necessarily copying and trying to get an identical copy, if I was, sort of making up some of the drawing, I would still want a reference there just to give me indications of flow and realism. The realism comes from the fact that things aren't all perfect and all lined up in the same areas. So we've got some big dense patches, and if you're looking at the reference image, I'm actually looking directly above the picture of the clouds with the building, and there's a very dark area that I'm just loosely working from. Now again, the temptation is to want to keep using that piece of tissue paper, but try and get as much value down in an area as you can. Leave the lighter areas as best as you can. Work from the dark areas. Because if we constantly are going over and constantly wiping, we are going to bear the graphite down into the tooth of the paper, and we're going to find it very hard to remove that. And it's the removal of the graphite that is so important. That's what's going to give us the contrast. So I can see that we've got an area of cloud which is coming over to the right that's got I think it's called a hammerhead. I know a couple of pilots, and they often talk about cloud formations, and there's something called a hammerhead, which I think is the tip of a storm depression or a storm area. And there's something that looks like one of those things that they describe to me sometimes when we're out and about. But it's coming over to the right hand side, and it's got almost an arm with tentacles coming off of it. When we are using a reference image, or we might even be working from real life, it's a fun game trying to find pictures and images within the clouds, and that certainly helps us with our rendition of getting something that's slightly more realistic. So what can we see within the reference image of clouds? Is there a face within there? Is there an animal that we can see protruding out? So again, I'm going to just use the tip of the tissue just to move some of that around and just smoothen out some of that value. And then we're going to repeat the process. Now, one other thing with the clouds is it's not always easy to see the direction that the light's coming from. So it's not always easy to see where the light source is in the direction that it is. So don't be too hung up on making one side of things all light and another side all dark, like we might do on a face, or even the building that we've got underneath. The light works very, very differently once it's from up above the clouds and it's coming through the clouds. It doesn't hit the clouds in exactly the same way that it would do a building, for sure. And we can just start to bring out some shapes, some wispiness. We can even get a slight indication of rain if we wanted to pull some of the value down. So we have some vertical lines or vertical streaks. And if you want to darken out again, we can come in with the 2B, because I'm not bearing down. And what we're also doing is we're avoiding major graphite shine, which is always important. But I can also come in with my 4B pencil. And my 4B pencil is my shortest pencil that I have at the minute. I've had this one for a couple of years now. But with the technique of constantly turning my pencil and not bearing down, using my tapered stroke, I've been able to keep hold of this one for quite a while. And you can just see now we're just starting to add some real depth into some of these clouds, just like the one on the reference image that is sort of hanging above our homestead. It's full of water, and that's about to break out into rain at any moment. And again, this 4B is going to move around beautifully with the tissue paper or even the brush. I just find with the brush you can't get rid of the strokes of the pencil as easily, or anywhere near the same. And what we don't want with these clouds is we don't want lots of textured brush strokes pencil strokes in there. And again, it's the temptation is to bear down with the pencil and press on too hard, but we're going to resist that temptation, and we're just going to keep building the value up a bit at a time. And it always gives us that option to take it away with the kneaded eraser if we need to. And obviously that is part of the process for these clouds. So I just want to thank you all so much again. I know I do this on every video, but I really do appreciate all of the support. Every like, comment, subscribe, share that you guys give me makes such a huge difference. The channel's really starting to take off, and it's just enabling people, and it's just giving people an opportunity to learn something new. And it's fantastic seeing when some of you pop up with one of the earlier projects that we've done, the baby or the barrels or the spheres. I've been saying to quite a few of you recently, don't rush, take it at your own pace. The videos are going to be there forever, they're not going to disappear. But it's really encouraging seeing how well some of you are doing. I'm going to use the slightly thicker end of my kneaded eraser now to give me a slightly different shape. I can remove a little bit more of the value, but in some slightly bigger, constantly turning, getting new edges on there. And then we can come in with the opposite end and get a little bit finer detail with some of the highlights in there. I recently did a picture of an aircraft for a pilot, and I added some clouds to that. And it was those fine details, those fine highlights that really sort of brought the drawing to life. I'm just going to add some of these cloud shapes over to the right hand side now. We've got some slightly different shapes in there, and they're not quite as dark. So again, I'm coming in with the 2B pencil, and this is just going to give me an opportunity to figure out whether I need to add much more value to the clouds at the top of this picture. What you'll also notice with some of the clouds is the bottom layer of clouds tend to be dark in some pictures. So you might have some rather light areas above, and then almost a bottom line. It almost looks like the clouds sitting on something, sitting on the top of something. And it's important to just try and get those details in. But again, without being too pedantic and too fussy with making it look perfect, because again, these clouds are not ever going to look the same again. I would argue that you would never ever see the same cloud formation twice in exactly the same detail. Don't be scared to get some graphite on the paper. And I think also what we don't want to do is we don't want to take attention away too much from the actual building itself. That's what we've spent the time on. And that's really what we want the viewer's eye to be taken to and drawn to. So let's not put too much detail and too much emphasis into some of these clouds. Otherwise what you have is you have a distraction almost for your viewer. We want them to be looking at this beautiful wooden barn with very different textures and lots of different angles and the look of a dilapidated building. We don't want them to be overly concerned with the clouds. We want them to notice the clouds. We want it to bring something to the actual drawing itself, but we don't want it to become the drawing. We've got some wispy flyaway bits over here as well. Some towards the top of the paper, towards the corner. So I can now see as I'm building value up around the rest of the page that I'm going to need to go a lot darker with some of these. If that's what I wanted to do, if I wanted to create a similar look to our reference image where we've got these very stark contrasting clouds. So I think I am going to go quite a bit darker. I might even use a 6B. Who knows? Let's see where the drawing takes us. That's all part of the fun and the process. Can't remember who it was. I saw one of you had got quite a long way on with this homestead. I think you'd even completed all of the grass and whatnot. It looked absolutely stunning. It was fantastic. And I showed it to my daughter and she said, "Oh, is that yours, Dad?" And I said, "No, it's one of the groups." She says, "I think it's better than yours." So I don't mind you all improving and getting good, but the moment my daughter starts to think that you're better than me, there's going to be some trouble. Only joking. It's fantastic. What a compliment to make. When somebody thinks that one of your drawings is what you've been, or is better than what you've been learning from, that's amazing. But I'm fully prepared for some of you, most of you, all of you maybe, to excel and overtake me one day at some point, which is great. But I think the thing with art and with drawing is we've all got our own techniques and we've all got our own style. I still look in awe at some people's work, and then you look at the comments that they've got and people are praising them and they're unhappy with what they've done in some way. So it's a funny old game. So I might add some 4B again, because I keep looking up at this reference image and we've got some very dark clouds in there. I've got nowhere near enough value into some of these areas. If I want to convey this moody, billowing look to some of these storm clouds, then I'm going to need to ramp up the value. But I'm not going to bear down and flatten the pencil tip, rub the graphite down into the tooth of the paper. I'm going to avoid that so that I can. I know I keep repeating myself, but it's so important that we preserve the tooth of this paper so we can keep removing it. Apply, remove, apply and remove. Again, I'm obviously I've got a very short pencil here, but I'm not trying to get too close to the tip, because what that's going to do, it's going to stop me from having this free flowing movement. Okay, so let's see now if we can remove some of this value around the areas to bring out some white portions, some clear areas in the sky, which is what we do have an awful lot of in certain places on this reference image. It's not a complete coverage of cloud. And it would be interesting to see how much graphite you've actually got in areas that you didn't really think you'd got much graphite. To work with. Okay, so that's starting now to develop. I'm enjoying this process, and I think this is one of my favourite processes is adding these light areas to our clouds. It somehow just brings them to life, but it's not anything that you really have to concentrate on. You know, you can be very, very liberal with your hand movements and directions. And I think you can start to see now the process that we're going through and how this is going to take shape. And that is ultimately what I wanted. I'm just going to use the brush just to get a little bit of value into some of those lighter areas, so that I have got the opportunity to take some more out. Like I said, I don't like to keep using the tissue paper. I would have perhaps used it about half the amount that I have done already if I was just drawing this and it was a commission or something. But obviously I'm trying to get the message across to you guys of the process that I'm using. So you will find that you perhaps don't need to use your tissue paper as much as I am doing. I like this. There's a break in the cloud over here. And I can see it's a break in the cloud, but what's behind it's very dark. And I like that. I like that sense of, I can see that it's not cloud there because it's surrounded with very white areas of cloud, but it's actually darker than the dark part of the cloud. It's just amazing how our brain interprets one area as being the sky or the background, and it knows automatically that the area that we've been working on at the top, although is a very similar value and very similar shapes, that is a clouded area and it isn't a break in the sky. So I'm going to need some 4B in there as well. And the value that I get around this area is going to move into the surrounding areas. It's going to allow me to take that away. So, just looking at the clock now, we are about half an hour in, and that's the sort of time that I like to give you. So, I'm going to leave you with that, and we're going to have one more session next week at the weekend, where we're going to be just fine-tuning, adding a few little details maybe to the homestead. But what I want you to do up until next week is really just try and use this technique to develop some clouds. If you want to freehand them, fine. If you want to use the reference image and try and get a little bit of what we have on the reference image in there, then by all means go for it. But I'm going to continue with this. It's probably going to take me another hour, at least another hour of work on this to bring out the values and the clouds. But remember, it's rinse and repeat. We're going to add the value. Use your tissue paper sparingly. Don't feel that you've got to be using that too much. Once you've done that, start taking out some of the highlighted areas and just experiment with your kneaded eraser. Bring out some shapes and some patterns. Is there anything that's familiar to you in the reference image that you can try and copy? A face, a pattern, a word. And repeat. So as always, thank you so much for watching. Our homestead is coming to a conclusion, which I'm really happy about, and I'm looking forward to the next project. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, get hold of us on Facebook, on their group, Tutorial Tuesdays, Beginners to Pro, and I look forward to connecting with you on there and Instagram as well, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, smack the notifications button, follow me on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter.